are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, this is Natty Day and I am here with you today for our Fostering Success Michigan Life Domain webinar series. We are looking forward to having a great webinar today and just want to thank all of you again for returning to join us as we continue our life domains focus throughout this year. So as I said, my name is Natty Day. I'm the Director of Outreach and Training with the Center for Fostering Success here at Western Michigan University. Just a few housekeeping items for folks. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. Feel free to use the chat or questions feature if you have questions throughout our webinar presentation. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so feel free to send them throughout and we will jot those down and then answer them at the end. If you're having technical difficulties, please feel free to contact the Citrix team at the number you see on the screen. And of course, as always, the recording will be available following our webinar in our Fostering Success Michigan website resource library. Before we get started, we'd like to say a special thank you to our funders, the Kresge Foundation, the Havermill Foundation, and Western Michigan University for their continued support of Fostering Success Michigan and our work statewide. And I would like to say a very special welcome to our guest expert today, author Shenandoah Chefalo. And she is here. She's going to be presenting a little bit later with us. But thank you, Shen, for joining us. And we're going to talk a little bit about your story and your memoir, Garbage Bag Suitcase, shortly. All right, so today's webinar is focused on supportive relationships and community connections. As many of you know, this is our domain for the month of February. This webinar is great for young people, students, professionals, and supportive adults. Throughout this webinar, we're going to provide an overview of the 7 life domains as identified by Casey Finley Programs, and we're going to do a specific dive into supportive relationships and community connections. We'll talk about why this domain is important to the outcomes of education and career success for students with experience in foster care. And we're going to highlight some great resources that Shen has provided for us. So, as many of you know, the 7 life domains are a framework that we use at the Center for Fostering Success to help orient and adapt all the different areas that impact a student's life. So this offers, the 7 Life Domains framework offers a way to organize and understand and also develop a response to the complexity of the lived experience. In particular, the supportive relationships and community connections domain is one of the most vital domains to kind of the ongoing success that we see for students as they make their way to and through the education to career pipeline. As we know, the experience of foster care disrupts relationships with the individual from their family, their friends, and their community. Many of you that work with young people that have experienced foster care know this and have seen this, and you may even have been impacted by this. Having relationships with a young person who's in foster care, seeing those relationships kind of come and go as a young person is moved from placement to placement. Often we see that young people with experience in foster care have a level of difficulty in establishing and maintaining supportive relationships and community connections. Again, these often happen with the disruptions of placements, disruptions of school, caregivers may change, and then of course we know that often the caseworkers involved in the case of a youth may change throughout their time in care. The supportive relationships and community connections domain is really a vital component to well-being and quite instrumental in helping young people succeed in all aspects of their life. Fostering Success Michigan and the Center for Fostering Success is particularly focused on how supportive relationships impact and support success in education. You can see here just a few of the areas where these supportive relationships can be developed. Of course, you have social relationships, romantic relationships, but also in areas of academic support, familial support, peer support, professional and community support. Community connections allow an individual to interact with each other, to share resources and experiences, and develop valued relationships and work together toward a common goal. Often we refer to these community connections as part of our social capital. And one of the things that Fostering Success Michigan explicitly works toward is to increase social capital, not just with our students, we know that that's all important, but also with our professionals. And we really think that it's vital for our professionals to also have a very diverse group of folks that they're working with, so that the students that they're working with have access to an even broader group of professionals and supportive adults. Networking is really key to making all of this happen. And so as you can see here, you know, we kind of have highlighted some of the support that networking can offer. Of course, job opportunities, just a broader knowledge about resources and supports available in the community, deeper connections. In particular, you know, we think about this as connections to spaces where young people can really discover and dig into aspects of their own identity. Our last month was our Identity Domain Month, and we talked a lot about the ways in which young people can explore their identity through supportive relationships and community connections. And then we also see that having these supportive relationships and community connections really provides mutual benefit in that the young people that we work with who have experienced foster care or are in foster care really are able to gain quite a lot from a diverse array of connections and relationships and interactions with folks. But those folks are also able to gain a lot of benefit from their relationships with the young person. In particular, we just see a deeper understanding of the unique experiences, the intersectionality of the experiences of foster care, and how those intersect with many, many aspects of life that often we don't necessarily think of, you know, when we're working with a young person or we're helping them move toward their goals. So we really encourage folks to, you know, really reach out and reach beyond sort of that client perspective and form these, you know, really meaningful relationships with the young people in their life. One resource that I've always found just exceptionally valuable for this domain is the Foster Club Permanency Pact. This is a document that was created by the foster club leaders, and as many of you may know, Foster Club is a group of young people with experience in foster care who do advocacy and education on behalf of young people with experience in foster care. The Permanency Pact really allows for a guided conversation between a young person and the supportive adults in their life to establish you know, the boundaries and the goals and the characteristics of their relationship. And so we really encourage you all to check this out. We have this available on the Fostering Success Michigan website. It's also available on the Foster Club website. I can say personally, I think that as many of us are working with young people and maybe you know, often are working with young people who don't maybe have the best experience with healthy boundaries, the Permanency Pact really allows young people to kind of have a guided way of articulating the boundaries that they would like to have between themselves and supportive adults, and even between themselves and peers. So I encourage all of you to pick this up, to download it, and to go through it, and you know, also share it with the young people that are in your life as a way for them to lead a conversation and to really feel empowered to have those conversations with supportive adults in their life about the role that those adults are going to play both now and long term. And so with that, we are going to have our guest join us. As I said earlier, Shenandoah Chefalo is the author of Garbage Bag Suitcase. This is the story of her journey into and through foster care. You know, Shen has done a lot of speaking. She does a lot of advocacy around issues related to foster care, in particular related to foster care and education. You may have seen her at different events that FSM has had. And it's just wonderful to have you today, Shen. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks for the invite to be here, and I'm excited to talk about this topic because I think it's an important one when you're working with foster youth or if you're a foster youth yourself, and one that sometimes goes undiscussed, which is how do we build relationships with people around us in a healthy way.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I will also just let folks know that we will have Shen's contact information at the end of this presentation, and just want to let you know you, of course, can purchase her book on Amazon. So there'll be lots of ways for you to get to know Shen better as we move throughout this webinar. So Shen, as our expert for supportive relationships and community connections, we would love to just hear about the work that you do, kind of the projects that you're involved with, the programs that you're involved with, and how those support the development of supportive relationships and community connections for young people with experience in foster care.
Well, it sounds like such an easy question, but foster care work is always so complex and always sort of spiders out into a lot of ways. So I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. So about 5 years ago, I decided to actually write the book with no intent ever to write a book. It was not on my bucket list of things to do. In fact, at that time, I had not told a single soul in my life that I had aged out of the foster care system. It was something that I had kept a secret, and I had been quite good and quite adept at keeping that secret. And then I was working in a criminal defense law office, and I had been doing that job for 15, 16 years. And I was increasingly concerned with the number of clients that were reporting they had spent time in the foster care system at some time in their life. Some of them had aged out, some of them had been reunified, and all the stories in between. Sure. But they all sort of had this commonality, excuse me, that they had spent time in the system. And so on a lunch break, I just Googled foster care statistics and was really alarmed at statistics, particularly coming out of the state of California, who was claiming that close to 90% of their inmates had spent time in the foster care system. And it was sort of a wake-up call for me. And so I decided to write the book, but only under the guise that if I shared my personal journey, before the system, how I got into the system and after the system, if people would stick around to figure out what the action steps were. And in the process of promoting the book and talking about the action steps, I got invited to talk all over the country. And a group in Washington, D.C. asked me if I'd be willing to put together some sort of training. That people were just starting to understand trauma and the adverse childhood experience study. But what they didn't understand was how to take the information they were learning and implement it into skills that they could use. So I worked for about 6 months developing a training program, went down to DC, we tried it out on a bunch of different scenarios, and it turned out it sort of hit a chord with a lot of people. And so from that, I partnered with a woman who has her PhD, Dr. Kathy Philon, and we opened Good Harbor Institute, which is this idea of translating evidence-based science research on the brain and trauma into skills that clinicians and specifically non-clinicians can use to change the conversations they're having to start to heal trauma but not to complicate and make more trauma in adversity, and to build resilience, which is where I think this supportive relationship comes in. This idea of how do we build resilience in kids to help them have better outcomes in life. And so most of my time currently is doing that, with my side project of working on schools for foster youth, which is my side hobby.
Just a small side hobby there. No big
small side hobby. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, well, so that's actually interesting that you say that, because the jigsaw puzzle piece, or sort of metaphor, I think is actually really helpful and appropriate, right? So there's so pieces that go into this question of how do we improve outcomes for young people with experience in foster care. And so many of the pieces are, they're interrelated, and they're sort of uniquely needed to fit together. And I think having, training pieces, having program pieces, having resources and books and different things, these are all parts of the jigsaw that I think help people kind of just sort of better support the young people that they're working with and help those young people put together their own jigsaw puzzle pieces.
Yeah, when I started doing this work, I got introduced actually to a really interesting book called Systems Thinking for Social Change. And listen, that's not a beach read book. That's like a sit-down sort of meaty scientific book. But the idea is really interesting, which is if you need to solve a complex problem, how do you avoid unintentional consequences so you can have lasting results? Which is a really scientific way to just say, how do all the pieces fit together without having to bend the edges of one, and force one piece to sort of give up something, right? Like you can, in a jigsaw puzzle, you can force a piece into place, but it kind of makes a ripple somewhere else. And I think it's important to understand how the pieces fit together and in the right place, because sometimes you got to move things around, right? Sometimes supportive relationships take a back seat to maybe something else, like education or something, and vice versa. And they kind of got to move around until you find just how everything fits together.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think for folks that are, likely familiar with the work of Fostering Success Michigan, our use of collective impact theory really aligns with what you're saying, where, we're looking at systems alignment and mutually beneficial activities. And we also, that's really the framework that we take when we talk about these 7 life domains. Is how can we align these? How can these be mutually beneficial? And of course, supportive relationships and community connections are completely intertwined in all of the other life domains. And we feel especially that they're intertwined for education. And I'm sure that you've probably seen that even, in your own professional and personal experience.
Oh, absolutely, right? And that changes, and I think what's particularly difficult about this work that we sometimes don't talk about is having all of that come together at once.
Yeah, right?
That is the thing, right? So with a jigsaw puzzle, to just go back to that analogy, all the pieces are in the box. And you just need enough time to kind of put them all there. When you're dealing with trauma and kids who've been through trauma, and kids who are continuing to go through trauma, sometimes pieces go missing. And you don't have all the pieces. And so you can have 6 of these life domains and then that one hole, right? And it can be a really big hole. And so and they move around all the time, and I talk to a lot of social workers and a lot of individuals working with youth, and they're just like, we almost had it, right? Like I feel like it's almost all the pieces, and we have 6, and then that 7th one eludes us, and then we might find the 7th one, and then another one goes missing, and it's a constant moving target, and I think that's what can be difficult, but I think that's why supportive relationships and community connections are so important, because those can oftentimes fill the hole for a while if a piece goes missing. You can use that as the support to fill the hole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's a great lead into my next question for you, which is really, how do you see supportive relationships and community connections related to post-secondary success for young adults with experience in foster care? And I know you probably have some viewpoints from your own experience, but also I know you put a lot of thought into.
Well, listen, post-secondary access and success, right? I wouldn't have even ended up in college without community connections. So I turned 18 halfway through my senior year of high school, and I turned 18 at a time in Michigan when there was not, I couldn't stay till 21. I was just going to be done at 18, and that was it, and good luck to you. So things are a little bit different from now and then, but I can only talk about mine. So when I was getting ready to turn 18, I actually negotiated with my foster parents to stay if I paid them the funds they'd been receiving from the state of Michigan. So that was cheaper than an apartment for me. So it was a better deal for me than trying to go out on my own and do it on my own, especially in the middle of my senior year of high school. So I stayed, And then I had a teacher who really asked me, what are you going to do after high school? And my idea at the time, and I was fifth or sixth in my graduating class, was to just continue working this job. I was working at a hardware store as a clerk, and I was just going to continue to work that job. That's kind of what I thought I would do after high school. And she thought that was a bad idea, and she sent me to our guidance counselor's office, who gave me terrible advice. And not to embarrass him, but his advice really was, you know, people like you don't go to college. People like you just learn to serve people like me. And people are often shocked or dismayed by it. I wasn't at the time because it was something I had heard quite a bit. And secondly, I think he was just trying to be honest. I think that's what he thought was the best advice he could give me. My teacher disagreed, and gave me a bunch of college applications, and I realized really quickly, these are neat, but they all want money for me to submit them, so I didn't submit them. And she ultimately stepped up to the plate and wrote the $125 check to Michigan State University, which was her alma mater, and said, I'll give you this check if you just go to Michigan State. And that's how I ended up at Michigan State.
Wow.
But without her connection, without her support, and we had a long relationship, we had a long history together, you know, that would have never happened. And that's about relationships, right? Mm-hmm. And then you get to Michigan State University, which is a ginormous campus, and at the time with no supports on campus. Again, that's changed in recent history, but when I was there, there was nothing. And for me, it was about establishing people that I could trust to get through things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that was establishing a relationship with the maintenance person in my dorm, who then allowed me to stay when the entire campus was closed for Christmas break. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's those things, right, that I think it's those relationships that kind of go untalked about, just as much as the relationships that might matter with who your student advisor is and those sorts of things. But it's also these smaller relationships.
Yeah. You know, so what I appreciate about what you're saying, one, it just sort of echoes conversations that I've had with so many people who have experienced foster care over the years, where, you know, when you talk about, so how did you get to college, you know, or why college? So many of them say there was this one teacher, you know, there was this teacher who kind of didn't give up on me, you know, kind of harassed me a little bit and kept saying, like, we're going to do this. And, you know, I think, so it speaks, to me, that sort of speaks to the power of one, right? I think it speaks to the fact that one of the spaces where our young people spend the most time with a consistent adult in their day is school. So seeing that teacher over and over again, you know, they may spend more time with that teacher than they do with anybody else. And so our educators have the ability to, you know, really greatly impact our young people with experience in foster care. And I think the other part that I sort of hear in the story with your teacher is that she set the expectation of success even before you knew that you were capable of it, it sounds like.
Yeah, but there was never any judgment with it. It was just this, just do this, you can do this. It wasn't a comparison of anything else, which I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
She knew I could do it, and that just was enough, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of exactly it, right? Like, she knew you can do it, and I think so often we see, you know, young adults who we see are so capable, and the question I think that we have to ask ourselves is, how often are we telling them that we see how capable they are, that we see their strengths, that we see
and that's the contrast with the advisor, right? Who's like, you're not capable. Like, I mean, it's a really interesting dynamic that gets played, because, and I've had this honest conversation with many social workers where I say, well, what does the kid want to do? Well, they think they want to be a doctor, but that's not realistic, because, you know, they're failing all of their classes and they're not even going to graduate on time. And I get that. I get that practical side of just day in, day out stuff. And then there's this, like, but who's holding the big picture? Who is, you know, who's out there just sort of being the dream believer, right? Like, Who's out there saying, well, listen, you're failing, so that's not going to work, but what can we do to change that, or what can you do to change that?
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and just flipping that from being like, I've got to tell you reality, which is what, I think my guidance counselor was telling me at school. I don't think he was saying it maliciously. I think he was just trying to be pragmatic about it. Like, listen,
Sure.
college is, like, you're going to be homeless in 6 months. Like, this is ridiculous to be talking about college. And I think he was just being pragmatic about it. And that's one way to do it. And the other way is to do exactly what my teacher did, which is, I don't care. What about this option? You
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And we probably need, a little of both. We probably need more like the teacher and less like the like the
Right.
guidance counselor. But someone's got to hold the dream, because ultimately it's up to that foster child what they're going to choose and do. And
Sure.
that's the other thing. Like, we have to learn to let go of what we want for a child, and we have to just help them get to what they need.
Right.
And
I think
that can be a problem sometimes too.
yeah, and I think that that's part of that. To me, that's the key, and that's the support in supportive relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it's different than a parenting relationship. It's different than even just a caregiver relationship. It's a supportive relationship, which is implying that we will support that young person for with all the choices that they make. Support doesn't mean condone, but it means being there, through the good and the bad, and so I completely agree with what you're saying. I think the other part that I wanted to highlight before we go on to the next question is, sort of you bringing up these kind of unsung heroes, the
Mm-hmm.
folks who were these relationships, these connections that you had that really provided some things that maybe often overlooked or often not noticed or not appreciated for the impact that they have. And so, sort of you pointed out very practically, being friends with the maintenance people so that you could stay in the dorms over the breaks, and that may be seen as kind of an odd relationship to have, but how valuable is that? I mean, tremendously valuable. I mean,
Well, and the
yeah,
one thing, I mean, listen, everyone who's listening to this recording, anyone who's worked with foster youth knows is they're like the best negotiators on the planet. Like, they're going to get what they need. They're really good at it. And you can put a lot of positive spin on that, and you can put a lot of negative spin on it. But they've learned to survive, and it's a skill not everybody has, okay? And you've got to do the things you have to do. I knew if I went anywhere for Christmas, and I don't know where I would have gone, Maddie, and truthfulness, at MSU for Thanksgiving break was the first break my freshman year, and I was able to stay at the international dorm because it was such a short break. A lot of the international kids didn't go home.
mm-hmm.
But over Christmas break, everyone leaves. Like, there's, because it's a much longer break and there's nobody there for, I don't know, 3.5, 4 weeks or something. And I knew that was coming after the Thanksgiving fiasco. And I was paranoid because I thought, I'm either going to be homeless, and if I become homeless, I'm dead. Like, I won't be back in January. And if I don't
Mm-hmm.
come back in January, this whole thing was pointless.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to tell you, that $125 check for me, felt like $1,000,000. We say $125, and, when you're talking about budgets, and you guys all know, it's not really that much money. But for me at that time, it was like somebody had given me $1,000,000. So I felt like, I was a bit guilted that I better do something for that $125.
Yeah.
And so it was about becoming friends with this maintenance man, which meant, that I was taking extra desserts out of the cafeteria to give him when I'd see him in the hallways. Like, I was buttering him up to just,
Mm-hmm.
like, make this big ask of him. And it
Right.
was a big ask, and he risked his job, basically, to allow me to do it, and I understood that. So, all of that matters. Those relationships matters. But people ask me all the time, like, what's the pivotal point for you where you think that was the turnaround? And it's interesting when you say small things, because I think most people who don't want to get involved with a foster youth because it's going to take too much time or hassle or whatever, and I always try to explain it's the small things. In 6th grade, I had a teacher who said to me after we did an assignment, "You're a really amazing kid."
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he ever thought another word about that phrase. I mean, I heard him say it to other kids, right, that they were great, that they did an awesome job. He probably said it 10,000 times that school year. He had a long career, millions of times over his career. But what he didn't know is that when he said that to me in 6th grade, it was the first time anyone had said something positive like that to me. And secondly, I was on the verge of going into foster care. In fact, within 2 months of him saying that to me, I was in foster care. And it was a phrase and a statement and a feeling that really stuck with me for a really long time. Mm-hmm. So relationships, too, are sometimes these really short things. Like, that was 3 months I was with that teacher. That was a really short relationship. So sometimes it's these small things and small, short relationships that can matter. It's not just long-term, I've known this person for 15 years relationships.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And brings us, to our next question, which is, what is one thing attendees can do today to improve outcomes for young adults with experience in foster care in the supportive relationships and community connections domain? And, I think I often hear and have heard, as long as I've been in the field of child welfare, well, I don't know if I have that kind of time. I don't know if I can make that kind of commitment. And, and I kind of say, well, so chances are you actually probably are already, in relationship with somebody who has had experience in foster care. And maybe it's just a matter of being more mindful about, the language that you use, or the assumptions that you make about, sort of what normal is, or inclusivity is. And, so I think that there's a lot that people can do. There's a whole range that people can do.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what kind of you think? Yeah.
So when I hear this question, the first thing that comes into my mind is ask a powerful question, right? Like, I wish I could just teach everyone how to ask more powerful questions regardless. And I'll just give you an example, because everyone knows a lot about ACEs and the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, and 2/3 of the population has at least a 1. So I say, well, if 2/3 of the population has a 1, that's things that happen to you prior to turning 18. So what if we just look over the lifespan of a person regardless of their age? Like, I have never met a single person who's not experienced something that was difficult and traumatic for them, right? I just don't know that person. So now if you assume, well, everybody's experienced something that you probably don't know anything about, then what if you could just ask a powerful question and everything could change? And so I relate this to a story, and I blogged about this, I don't know, maybe about 8 months ago, so you could backtrack on my blog and find all the details. But I was at Meijer grocery store, and I hate going like everybody, and the lines were super long, and I'm slowly moving my cart up, and the woman in front of me, so I'm almost there, I'm almost to the belt to empty my cart, starts freaking out on the cashier because there's no peanut butter. She couldn't find the peanut butter, and she is having a full-on meltdown. Now, most of us have probably seen this happen in a variety of different settings where, some customer just starts like in on somebody who has no control, right? Like, the cashier doesn't control peanut butter consumption in Meijer. And I can see the people behind me rolling their eyes, and frankly, I'm just thinking, I'm never going to get out of this store. And probably, like, if that would have happened 2 or 3 years ago, I would have just rolled my eyes and picked up a magazine and minded my own business. Now I'm just older and more forceful in my life, and I don't have time for that sort of nonsense. And so I can see that this has, she is upset. The cashier looks like she's going to start crying. This is clearly not about peanut butter, because nobody gets that upset about peanut butter.
Right.
And so I just moved closer to her, and as soon as she got a break in being angry, I just said, I'm really sorry. Is there anything I can do to help you? And she just stopped, and I could see tears. She went from pure rage to tears in her eyes. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to end really badly. Maybe I've pushed my luck. And instead, she just said, oh my gosh, my husband just died, and my mom is sick and in the hospital. All of a sudden, she was telling me her whole life story and all these terrible things that are going on for her. And I just realized really in that moment that sometimes people just need to be recognized, that they just want you to see that they're hurting, they just want you to ask them, and they want to be heard, I think. And, so we talked about the cashier finished her order and she left, and then I went through and I was walking out the door and I could see her standing outside, and, she stopped me and gave me a hug and just said, nobody's asked me how I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing, like, and we're all capable of that. Like, it doesn't even have to be a foster youth, right? Like, everybody in our community, people are hurting all the time, and they just need to be seen. And really, a powerful question or a moment of graciousness or kindness on your part can, I mean, it sounds so cheesy, but the fact is people just need to have some empathy for other people, because you don't know what they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think, so that last statement that you said, having some empathy, and I think, I know for a lot of professionals, they're like, I'm so busy, or I'm empathetic for everybody, I don't have extra time, and I think it's kind of thinking about it maybe a little bit differently and saying, so how can you sort of have this kind of like effective empathy by, asking the important questions when you see somebody who, is, maybe not engaging or is obviously, having a hard time. And I think at the same time also when we're in relationship with young people with experience in foster care, you know, like asking them those questions even when things seem okay, I think is really,
Yeah.
and kind of saying, like, things seem to be really great, like, how are you doing, and taking that time to, create that opportunity to open the door for those authentic conversations. Because things may seem okay and things may actually be okay, but do they have somebody to even share that with, or is it that there's only attention when, there's a meltdown? And
Well,
so,
that's exactly it. I mean, it's just our society in general, right? We sort of go over the good things and then we focus on the bad things. I mean, most people I know do it with themselves and society in general. Like when things go really good, well, there's nothing to talk about. So let's just talk about, my husband used to joke that he worked at a job and he would be complaining about his golf game. And I'm like, if what you have to complain about is your golf game, things must be going really well. Like,
right.
because there's this order of life, like, if that's the only thing you have to complain about, things have to be good, so let's focus on that. But we tend to just overlook that, right?
Yeah.
And we hone in on how could we, how could I lose weight, or how could I, something so minute in the big picture of the world.
Yeah. And I think the other part is it doesn't have to be a long conversation. It could be, I think, going back to like what you said about the teacher when you were younger, just making the comment of, you're a really special kid, and I think taking that time, having a 5-minute conversation that, is not just about the tasks at hand, that's about, how are you doing, what's going well for you right now.
Or it's a compliment and not even a conversation. I mean, some of the
Yeah,
most effective people I know in life are people who find something positive to say about complete strangers.
yeah.
Just passing them in the hallway, like, oh, I love your earrings. Oh,
Mhm.
that's pretty on you. Oh, that's, oh,
Yep.
looking good. Like sometimes it's not even a conversation. Sometimes it can just be that compliment, that notice of seeing somebody. And I was just at a school where there's a principal who was doing this very effectively, and I was there for a meeting that had nothing to do with him, and I was just kind of standing in the hallway and just watching the moods of the kids as they walked past him lift, right? Like you could
Mhm.
see them and they were kind of sulking and, high school kids, right? And walking across, and then he would say something to them and they would immediately sort of like straighten up and walk tall after he complimented them.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think there's something to be said about that, of just being free with a smile and with a positive comment sometimes.
Yep.
Even if things are going really terrible, right? Like,
Yeah.
even if the kid has done something really bad and terrible, it's like, can you start with a compliment? Can you
Yeah,
start with what's
absolutely.
good?
Well, and I think it's the, being seen and being heard. And so,
Mm-hmm.
people, in however, whenever your workday ends today, mine will end, in a few hours after this webinar, but, if we all made it a goal just to take a minute to see somebody and truly hear somebody, especially for our young people that have experienced foster care, it can be a small thing, but it's a big thing to them, and I think it's something that makes us actually better people.
Absolutely.
So I would love to hear, you shared some resources with us, and we have these links, and for everybody who's listening, we'll have these also included in the toolkit that we will be doing at the end of the month for our life domains. We'll also have these resources in the webpage with our webinar. But if you could tell us a little bit about, why you chose these resources and what they might offer folks, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the Center of the Developing Child, the Harvard University Working Paper number 13, some of your listeners may be familiar with that. I know it has a very sort of scientific-y name, but essentially this is the work that Harvard did on understanding the brain and how we do build resilience in kids specifically. And they had 3 ways. And all 3 ways, in my mind, are supportive relationships and community connection driven. The first was, that every child just needs one adult figure, positive figure, stable figure in their life, which, is number 1 in my mind, which will lead to some of these other things. Number 2 in that report was about a connection to community or spiritual, the church or some sort of spiritual relationship and helping kids find that. And the third was giving kids the ability to learn a skill or become, sort of an expert in something. And I think all of those matter when we're sort of talking about this specific domain. So that is the scientific paper behind how do we build resilience and what does that actually mean. So I think that's important. And then the building community connection is actually a link to a website, which is how can you get involved in a community? And I think there's a lot of adults that don't know how to get involved in a community. I was having this conversation with some people who moved into my neighborhood who aren't from this town and are retired. How do they get involved and do something? And so there's a list of all sorts of ways, finding what you love and doing some volunteer work and all of those ways in which you can connect yourself to, sort of what you were saying earlier about networking, to meet those people, to build those connections and have that long-lasting thing. So if there's kids here, the one thing I think foster kids that perhaps gets overlooked is that they need mentors, and not necessarily mentors that are in their foster care social work circle. Mentors outside of there. What's your interest beyond that? If you're interested in animals and want to become a veterinarian, how do you get that sort of mentor? And I think one thing that is difficult, at least for me and other alumni of foster care that I've talked to, it's really hard for us to ask for something, and it's probably even more difficult for us to receive something. We're not the best gift receivers, I've been told, and most of us admit to that. But I think the more we can connect foster youth to mentors and all sorts of different things is really important and valuable. And that is sort of tied in with this idea of volunteer work, because I think a lot of mentors can come through volunteer work. And getting connected in real ways in relationships outside of the foster care circle. Some of the people that really had an impact in my adult life knew nothing of my foster life. And I think there was some value there because I felt I got treated like everyone else, and that was important to me. And they also didn't let me use that as a crutch or excuse because they didn't even know, right? So I think there's some value in reaching outside of that circle, as scary as that can sometimes be, to people who maybe don't know about your past and all of your stuff.
Yeah, I love that your resources kind of go from, maybe the more academic to the practical, and kind of in spaces in between. I think, the building community connection resource and your point about how, it can be hard to know how to get involved with your community, and yet, when you're involved in a community, you know how many people are in need of, you know, just extra hands for different activities, and, you know, folks to, you know, help spread the word about, you know, different, you know, events that are going on or resources that are trying to be built. And so there's always room, you know, to add.
Absolutely. From service work to government work to, you know, like getting involved in politics or working on a campaign to Rotary or Kiwanis or Zonta, or, you know, like there's so many ways in which you can sort of insert yourself in,
Mhm.
you know, a book club, whatever it is, the library, things you're interested in, chess clubs, all of those things. In almost every community, you're going to find somebody else who's interested in that same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other part about, you know, mentorship, we talk a lot about mentorship. It's a big part of the campus support work that happens here in Michigan, you know, having mentorship programs, mentors available. I think the career mentorship part is a unique piece, and that's where I think some folks in the community, you know, that maybe you're kind of thinking, how do I get involved, or if you're, you know, on a campus, or you're in an organization and you're thinking, how do we get our community members more involved with our young people? Looking for those career mentors, even if it's just for a couple days, you know, out of the year, to bring students, you know, to the workplace so that they
Mm-hmm.
can see it. There's huge value in that, you know, and then I think there's also huge value for young people in just exploring careers that they don't necessarily see all the time, you know, and giving them insight into what else could you do with that English degree, what else could you do with that psychology degree. You know, there's a
Well,
lot.
or deciding what it is you're gonna do. I mean, I
Yeah, yeah,
think, you know, everyone asks kids all the time, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? The problem is like, there's so many options and choices that I know kids don't even know about, right? That are really cool things. And um, it's about experience. And one of the things that most foster youth don't have is experience with people in those types of careers or fields, right? So they're not even things that they're aware of that exist. And you only get that by sort of doing this mentoring. You know, what are the things that inspire you? What are the things that interest you? Go try that hat on.
mhm.
It's
And I
always
think,
one of my frustrations that people say, well, kids quit things. Like, my kids quit like 10 sports and 2 instruments. And I'm always like, yeah, that's the point of being a kid. Like, you're
right,
supposed to try on these hats, and not all of them are going to look good on you, you know?
yep,
To figure out what you love. And we just, a lot of times as a society, don't give time for that to happen.
yep.
And that's what being a kid's about. And for foster youth, you know, that usually happens a little later in life.
Hmm. Well, and I think that that's the part about, you know, building social capital and having diverse networks of support, both as the professional, the networks of support that you have access to, that you can also share with the young people in your life. But then for young people, you know, for them to see the value in having diverse networks and, you know, all of the different ways that and perspectives that they can look at life, and the different ways that you can you know, contribute to the world, to making the world better. I think that those are just, having those mentors, having that, you know, kind of those connections are hugely important to that ongoing success.
Yeah, and not being afraid to fail at something, I think, as well. Like, I
Hmm.
think that's the other thing we can all, you know, get on board with, is that it's okay if something doesn't work out.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So my last question for you is the question that we always like to end with our experts, and that's really our humble brag. So, you know, the opportunity for you to share something that you're really excited about, you know, something maybe within this domain that kind of has you really jazzed, and you know, is something that you want to share with the rest of our network
Oh
out
my gosh, this is difficult. So for me, you know, getting to the point of having a book was huge,
there.
and
Hmm.
frankly, just having it, I didn't even care if anybody ever read it. So, like, just having it out of my head and on paper was fun and important for me. But that has opened up so many doors. And in truthfulness, it was another mentor who sort of pushed me to write the book because I had no intent of doing it. And he was kind enough to send me about 15 emails a day begging me to write the book, which is how the project kind of got started. But that book has led me literally around the world speaking to groups and organizations. And, you know, I just got a call this week from CNN. So hopefully, right, I'll be doing some stuff with CNN and appearing on TV talking about the foster care movement. So that is the fun and sort of exciting part of what I'm doing. And then the behind the scenes, like, you know, what matters are the emails that pour into me every day, or the Facebook messages that pour in of people sharing their own personal stories that they've not told anybody. And some are gut-wrenching and heartbreaking, and others are really inspiring and uplifting. But that I kind of get to be the keeper of those stories, you know, and that I've been chosen to be the keeper of those stories is really just an extraordinary, awesome part of doing this that I never anticipated.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, and congratulations. And, you know, I think you're, we were talking about your book and saying, you know, it's so accessible in a way that I think people can pick it up and they can read it and they can, you know, sort of have this understanding that, like you said, is often, you know, people don't speak about, that your ability to communicate it really, I think, kind of peels back some layers that that help people understand, you know, the impact of foster care on the life of a person, and then, you know, sort of the ideas that you have about how, from your experience, you know, things could be changed. So, you know, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been awesome to have you. We do want to give some time for questions. So if anybody out there has you know, any questions for us, we'd be happy to take them. I did have one question. Again,
Sure.
You know, kind of going back to your book. So you know, you gave at the end, you give some ways that the foster care system can be improved and kind of revamped. And I wonder if you could just share, you know, obviously we have just a couple minutes, but maybe one or two ways that, just talk a little bit about some of your ideas that you pose at the end of the book for people that may not have read it yet.
Sure. Probably the first one, and the one that I'm the biggest advocate of, and the one I'm working most on right now, is boarding schools for foster youth, which I know there will be people sighing who are listening and saying this is a terrible idea. But for me, when I was deciding about how I wanted to end the book and what I would want if someone just gave me a magic wand and I could do whatever I wanted, and I just went back to, like, what would have been good for that 13-year-old girl when she entered the system for the first time. You know, what would have been good for her? Because, right, I don't think I'm that special. So if it's good for me, it's probably good for other people. And the one place that I had always felt safe in my life was school. And I was pretty good at it, and I liked school. I didn't get a lot of time to focus on it. You know, I attended 35 schools over my school lifetime. So I really wanted that to be my stable place. And so I also get the opportunity to watch a lot of kids go to really expensive East Coast boarding schools who, you know, the kids who get into Princeton and Brown and all of those great Yales. And I just thought, what if we just gave that opportunity, you know, that the most fortunate kids in our country get to our least fortunate kids. And so I started working on that, and I found the Hershey School in Pennsylvania. And then actually in editing my book, my editor, who lives in North Carolina at the time, went to a fundraising event and called me from the bathroom saying, I think we're raising money for the exact school you want to start. And she was right. It was the Krosnor School in North Carolina. And, you know, they've been providing a boarding school atmosphere for foster youth in North Carolina for the last 25 years. And they have something like a 97% high school graduation rate, but they have almost an 85% college graduation rate from those same kids. So the work they're doing is phenomenal. And I just think that, you know, the stability that a place like Krosnor provides is phenomenal. They've seen kids who have been reunified with birth parents, and the birth parents have allowed the kids to stay at the school because the progress they're making is so wonderful. So I think there's an opportunity. I don't think that opportunity is for every kid. I by no means think that every kid should be put into a setting like that, but I think there's a large portion of foster youth who would excel in a situation like Krosnor.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, you know, it's such an intriguing idea, and I encourage everybody to read your book, to, you know, check out your website, follow your blog, and you're on Twitter, and you know, I always appreciate the posts that I see you with on Twitter and Facebook, and so, you know, I think as people, you know, follow you, they'll better understand, you know, some of these ideas, but also think about spaces where they can start, you know, implementing aspects of really this kind of holistic support that you're visioning, you know, in the work that they're doing. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have you and hear your perspective. I'm sure that we're going to hear much more from you, and so someday you'll get to, you know, we'll get to say we knew you when. And you know, just always encourage folks out there that are listening, if you know, want to follow up with Shen, feel free. We'll have her contact information available following the webinar on our website, and again, you can find her online in various places. So just thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me, Maddie.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're just going to do a couple polls just to kind of get some feedback from folks out there, just to sort of get some information about how you felt about the webinar today. So one, we always like to know if people are attending this webinar alone or in groups. So if you are able to, we're going to launch the poll right now. And if folks just want to tell us, you know, are they attending the webinar alone, in groups? And it looks like a little bit of half and half, which is great. Okay, thank you. And the next poll question that we're going to ask is, has today's webinar increased your knowledge about how you can better support young people with experience in foster care? So you can give your answer now, and it looks like most people are saying agree, strongly agree. There's some neutral. That's awesome. Thank you, everybody. And our last poll is, would you recommend this webinar to another professional or educator? And of course, we just always want to remind folks that the webinars are will all be available on the Fostering Success Michigan website. You know, we encourage you to use these as professional development opportunities for anybody that's working within child welfare. You can use these toward your continued education clock hours needed for DHHS. So thank you so much. It looks like most people said likely or highly likely. Awesome. So thank you all so much for your feedback. That really helps us. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you again to Shen, and we wish everybody a wonderful afternoon. Take care.